All right, perfect. Here we go. So we are at a good spot. We are right at the top of the hour. So we're going to go ahead and kick off today's webcast, Reimagining Procurement, Embracing the Digital Revolution. Before I get started, just a few housekeeping items. All lines have been muted to ensure call quality for today's presentation. We are recording this session and you will receive an email with the presentation deck and recording link within 48 to 72 hours of today's event. If you are in need of technical assistance, please message the host through the Zoom chat feature. To view this presentation in full screen mode, click on the full screen icon in the upper right-hand corner, as this will enable full screen access. At the bottom of your screen, you will find the main control panel. From here, you can access the Q&A feature to submit questions. I would like to remind our members that we are always more than happy to have advisory members presenting at our monthly webcasts. If you think you have a good story to share with our members, please reach out to your account manager for further details. Attendees of today's webcast are eligible for 1 hour of continuing education credit. In order to receive CPE credit, the attendee must be present for a minimum of 50 minutes, participate in all polling questions, as well as complete the webcast survey, which will pop up in a separate internet browser tab once the webcast is finished and you've closed out of Zoom. The learning objectives for today's webcast are to understand digital procurement trends, secondly, to explore a practical case study, thirdly, to consider future strategies for digital procurement. Oh, there we go. All right. Quickly, before turning it over to Elizabeth for today's session, I wanted to share with you just a few of the latest program updates as well as upcoming events. Looking at upcoming events, our next webcast is the 2030 Team Interview, AI Agents, CPOs, and Operating Models Reimagined on May 15th. So if you haven't done so, please make sure you register, and we look forward to seeing you there. With that, I will turn it over to today's first speaker, Elizabeth Zucker, to kick off the webcast. Elizabeth, over to you.
Thank you, Courtney. Hi, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon. Thank you for joining. Good evening, maybe. Thank you for joining today. I'm really pleased to be able to present and introduce our main two speakers for this session. Dan Valero is the Vice President of Indirect and Logistics Procurement at Campbell's, and he's going to be in a conversation with Darshan Deshmukh, the President of ProcureAbility, and the company, if you're probably aware of ProcureAbility as an organization, but I want to talk a little bit about Darshan. He has extensive global operations and delivery experience in the managed services and advisory field. He's actually, prior to joining ProcureAbility in his leadership role, he spent his career building large-scale global delivery operations in companies that include IBM, Denali, and also with product organizations like OpenGov and iCertis. So these are all household names. He's been working hard to bring these types of solutions to global companies in high-tech financial services, manufacturing, retail, utilities. Also here from ProcureAbility is Annie Maldonado. She is here because Darshan's been having some technical difficulties. So if you hear her voice, she's stepping in to make sure that we have a seamless transition and continue the conversation with Dan and the experiences with the ProcureAbility team. So with that, I'll turn it over to Darshan and let you continue the conversation.
Great. Thank you very much, Elizabeth. I hope all of you can hear me. And just as you're thinking about the challenges, the logistical challenges, like we're going through a little bit of I'm in India right now, and as everybody has heard, like there are some
and you can go to the next slide, Courtney.
Tensions between Pakistan and India, and as part of that, network issues that are going on. So these are exciting times to be a procurement leader, and also challenging. We're going to talk about Reimagination Point, where our traditional procurement function meets transformative power of digital innovation and AI. The focus is on how technology is bringing agility, efficiency, and value creation to various organizations. If you think of it used to be traditionally a back office function, decades or so, it has become a lot more strategic and again, seat at the table for any organization as a value delivery organization. Now that essentially means the companies are using like leading edge technologies to help them in today's rapidly changing marketplace. The trade wars, it could be tariffs, it could be supply constraints that we go through as part of our overall supply chain challenges. But these changes come in a very rapid pace. And as these rapid pace changes come in, as a procurement organization, we react to those as fast as we can. So when we think about people, process, technology, technology plays a very key role in driving some of these efficient and effective reaction to these rapid changes that we have to kind of work through. And then as part of that, we also go through a strategic transformation as a procurement organization. And that's the reimagination point. So with all of these challenges, with all of these rapid changes, we're at an inflection point where the digital solutions or digital innovation within procurement is helping us to go from a tactical back office function to a strategic value delivery organization. So we'll talk a lot more about that in today's webinar. And I'm joined by my partner in crime today, Dan Valero. I've been working with him for last few years now, who's VP of Procurement and Logistics at Campbell's. And we've been working together for last around 5 years or so in driving the procurement transformation. And a little bit of an introduction for Dan when we get into a little bit of a case study conversation so that you'll get to. So I'm excited to have him as part of the panelists to go through this case study with us. Going to the next slide. So let's start with like a polling question and get a quick, sorry, I think there's one slide in between where there are like our view of the three key challenges as we think about the procurement organizations are kind of facing at this point of time. One is rising cost pressures. As we go through inflation, tariffs, and supply chain constraints, the costs are changing around 15 to 20% year over year. And procurement, as a procurement leaders or procurement professionals, we have to make sure that we tackle those as part of our overall role. In the last 18 months to 2 years or so, AI is taking like a life of its own as all of us are kind of going through that. 70% of the procurement leaders are investing in AI-driven efficiency. And this is most probably a conservative number. And every couple of months that you go through, this procurement leaders are focusing their energy in making sure that they are identifying the use cases that are specific to AI and then test it out and continue to drive efficiency and effectiveness in their overall operations. And then the regulatory and ESG compliance continue to be a key part of our overall challenge is as we go into 2050 targets that a lot of countries have put themselves against the emissions, the sustainability and compliance continue to be a key part of overall procurement strategy. Most of the organizations, if you look at the large Fortune 100 organizations as an organization, and procurement plays a very key role into that. So let's move on to the next slide, and I think we have the first poll. Courtney, you want to launch the poll?
Yep, poll is launched now. To Darshan's point, we have the first poll here. It is what is the biggest hurdle your procurement team is facing today? Of course, this is a single choice question. We have 4 options here. Cost fluctuations as the first one, rising material and logistics costs impacting budgets. Secondly, we have geopolitical tensions, tariffs, trade restrictions, and global instability. Thirdly, we have economic factors, whether it's inflation, stagflation, and currency fluctuations. Fourth, we have regulatory compliance and ESG, new reporting mandates, sustainability goals, and supplier accountability. Please get those responses in. Also, please remember that this is a requirement for CPE credit. We have one more poll coming up as well. As those responses are coming in, I would do want to say, Darshan, it is a little bit hard to hear you at the moment, just with the connection. So just wanted to make you aware of that as well. All right, the responses are coming in. Just a few more seconds and I will close it. Please get your final responses in and I'll share them on the screen. 5 seconds. All right, sharing the results now.
So this is an interesting statistic, as you would expect. around 40% are saying that geopolitical tensions, tariffs is on everybody's mind, right? So that cost fluctuations definitely is one of the challenges that everybody's kind of thinking about, and the economic factors, inflation, stagflation, everybody's kind of worried about. So again, I mean, this is like a quick poll to kind of get a good understanding of what are some of the things that your organizations are thinking about. And then when you're thinking about these challenges, one of the very relevant topic in today's procurement organizations is what sort of technology stack and how should you think about technology in solving some of these challenges. And when you think about that, there are two ends of the spectrum. Platform approach, where you have one large platform that solves most of your problems and fill in the holes with some niche technologies to solve those problems. And then the other end of the spectrum is figure out best in class to solve the use cases that you're trying to solve. So let's say think about strategic sourcing, transactional procurement, contracting. You choose very specific technology platforms to common data models. So that's the other end of the spectrum. And those generally tend to depend on what sort of technology investments have you made previously and what sort of technology investments you are planning to make for future. If you think this to give a perspective, if we look at ProcureTech publication, around 100 procurement-specific digital solutions that are used. And then when you think about that, it depends on what sort of strategy you want to kind of choose, whether it's a one platform strategy or multi-platform strategy. That tends to be one of the decisions that you have to make. And then Dan and Campbell's team have chosen the second option, which is choosing multiple platforms to solve unique use cases. Now, just to introduce Dan, Dan is VP of Procurement and Logistics at Campbell's. He's been with Campbell's for 10 plus years. So he has gone through a full transformation on how Campbell's procurement organization have matured and been part of the key decisions around the platform decisions. So he's going to give us like his perspective on what sort of transformation that they have gone through and how did they think about it. And then Dan also brings a very rich experience in supply chain and procurement. He spent five years in the military and then years in the supply chain organization before joining Campbell's.
Thank you, Darshan. A little bit broken, so I'll help fill in some of those gaps where some of the audience members may have missed it. But first and foremost, I don't want to assume anything, but for those of you who may not be familiar, Campbell's is a food and beverage company. We produce a variety of products from things obvious to soup, but also goldfish, sauces and salsas, pretzels and chips. A couple of our brands here are visible on the screen. Happy to be a part of today's digital transformation discussion around procurement. As Darshan mentioned, we've prioritized leveraging multiple niche solutions over a single all-in-one platform. So in evaluating this approach, we considered several factors, right? One is the speed to implementation. Obviously, a second one being what's the cost of this solution and the return on investment of it, product effectiveness, and then ultimately end user engagement. And you're going to see that theme around end user engagement come up in a lot of my part of the conversation in our journey here at Campbell's. But ultimately, we found that by adopting niche solutions resulted in greater long-term return on investment. It reduced our implementation efforts. We'd had fast realizations of value. And one thing I want to mention is that we have in the past fallen victim to these one-stop shop solutions. And this is not to suggest in the modern age of AI and automation and digital transformations that these one-stop shop solutions can't work. But But ultimately, we have found that in the past that when we do go down those routes, they are often good at one or two good things, but feel like a little bit like square peg, round holes in others, and ultimately limit our team's overall use of the platform, creating workarounds, etc. So that's one of the reasons why we decided to go down this route of looking at specific niche solutions as we progressed through our digital transformation journey.
So I think, Dan, I have one question here. This is definitely very consistent with some of our clients that are approaching technology and digital solutions. A lot of times it depends on what sort of problem that you're trying to solve, whether it is like a clean data problem, whether it is a compliance problem, whether it is a visibility problem. So can you kind of maybe just take the team through, like, when you decided to go with multiple routes, what were some of the key decision points as you're kind of going through that? And I think this is one of your kind of, as part of your journey, you're going to take the team through that. But I think it will be critical for people to understand, how did you kind of go through that as a journey?
Absolutely, absolutely. And as we're all aware, making decisions like this does take time and doesn't happen overnight. And looking back, to 2019, most of our processes were highly manual and fragmented, right? We had a lack of data visibility, which would slow down decision-making processes. We ultimately slowly started to experiment with a variety of tools that could support the procurement function, from intake processes to now more advanced AI solutions. Effectively, we identified pain points and opportunity areas and prioritized them in almost as a pretty simple benefit effort matrix, right? Prioritizing efficiency gains, and then the end all be all, which is, how much of these systems and tools can generate savings or reduce risk. And over time, since 2019, we've kept adding.
That's great. So Dan, maybe one question I have is, if somebody is in the early stage of their transformation and thinking about this, what are some of the landmines people should avoid when they're trying this out or starting this journey, like in their early stage transformation?
Yeah, absolutely. So for us, we started with revitalizing our intake. That's the bread and butter of what we do. We know we needed a simple tool to get us organized and to capture data in the same way across all of indirect procurement. The challenge was how to accomplish this project intake across Campbell's, which has multiple divisions. We have hundreds, if not thousands, of stakeholders, and across a wide variety of diverse categories. An intake request for something as simple as freight lanes is wildly different than an intake for consulting or contingent labor or marketing for creative agency sourcing, so forth and so on. So accomplishing this took time and thought, because one thing we decided early on was that we felt like this intake process, which again is the bread and butter of procurement, needed to continue to feel white glove to the stakeholder. Procurement, after all, is a support function. This couldn't come across as a ticketing system for our stakeholders, leaving them feel that procurement was a transactional in our approach. Secondly, after we tackled intake, we took a look at spend visibility. Partnered with ProcureAbility, we invested in Pure Spend to provide visibility across our spend data. That's obviously another cornerstone of procurement, understanding what we're spending, where we're spending it, how. So a lot of time was spent mapping and ultimately using machine learning capabilities to recategorize spend to the right place. Another area, after you get out of, all right, how do we intake this? How do we allocate resources? Do we have the right spend visibility in place? Was, do we have the right sourcing technology? So e-sourcing tools was what came next. And that was one of the biggest challenges we faced in terms of how much time and administrative lift went into going and executing RFPs. In some instances, we felt like we were spending more time on paperwork than we were actually engaging with our potential supply base. So we invested in e-sourcing tech, a lightweight tool, much more user-friendly and designed for the end user in mind. Again, coming back to that adoption rate, end user being critical, call it North Star when it comes to your digital transformation journey. It did take a lot of piloting, trial and error, but ultimately we're in a much better spot today. We're much more efficient across our traditional sourcing type of events, but as well as leaning much more heavily into e-auctions, which is something that we've leaned into a lot more over the recent years. Lastly, when it comes to e-sourcing tech, we started integrating market intelligence and benchmarking into the actual sourcing tool. This is a lot easier for some categories than others, transportation, for instance. However, we're now at a point where we have a tool that's providing recommendations based off of market intelligence on where to source next, and also building a sourcing event for us based on that market intelligence and benchmarking data and providing it. We're close. We're not quite there yet on one-click RFPs, but it's certainly within line of sight that we're getting very close to that. The last area I'd comment on outside of intake, spend visibility, e-sourcing has been in that market intelligence space. Some tools we are, as I mentioned before, combining that e-sourcing capabilities and tools and market intelligence together, but there are certainly categories that it's just not quite there yet. However, it doesn't mean that we aren't always actively pursuing better and better market intelligence data. We're in a much better position today with now real-time insights into market trends, into competitor activity, into macroeconomic trends, and now certainly with tariffs abound, trying to gather momentum cases and scenario building around what does these tariffs mean to our total cost of products sold and the margin profile and those chunks, focusing second, e-sourcing capabilities, and then market intel.
This is great, Dan. Thanks for taking the team through your overall journey. One question that comes to mind is, what about AI and Gen AI? Because everybody's thinking about it, everybody wants to dabble into it, and there is always a little bit of a waiting game on what has somebody else done, and can I try that out, right? So have you implemented any of those products that are AI enabled in your portfolio? And if you can throw a little bit light on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are adding a tool to our arsenal around AI-powered redlining, so contracting assistance tools. This is honestly something that when we started writing this business case, we thought of it as a pure efficiency and productivity play, but it's actually proving to be much more than that. We all know that contracting is an excruciatingly long and time-consuming process for our category managers. The tools that are available now with long language learning software are much more advanced than what they have been in the past, and the connections between, whether it's Westlaw or any of the other pieces of our that our attorneys and legal teams need to also make sure are embedded is truly a lot more advanced today than it has been in years past. And the tool is a real game changer. It quickly analyzes documents, it highlights discrepancies, it aligns your red lines with whatever your internal standards are for whatever your master services agreement. It's saving not only our procurement team, but our legal partners as well, a ton of hours. The chatbot features can summarize contracts in a matter of seconds. It can reword clauses. It can even provide fallback positions for when red lines come in. Here's your fallback position 1. Here's your fallback position 2. So taking a lot of that second guessing game work out of the category managers or the legal partners who are trying to go through this contracting process. And while all those functionalities and those areas are exciting, the one thing that's been actually the most interesting for us to explore is the contract repository chatbot functionality. And that's, find me all my contracts that have name that attribute, right? It can be find me all my contracts that have embedded derivatives, that have tariff exposure, right? How much of my contracts have a tariff exposure to what particular country? How many of my contracts have rebate or prebate or volume tier discounting or credit components? Obviously, we all go through some attrition, and sometimes you don't have, 100% like great handoffs between category managers. When you have tens of thousands of contracts in a repository that now you've got smart chatbot functionality around, you can certainly lean into it more when it comes to just overall continuity. But in honestly, like generating savings and making sure that are we tracking all of these contracts that have rebate or volume tier discounting. So that's where we've leaned into the Gen AI space more than others, is in AI contracting assistance and smart repository.
This is great, Dan. So I think we have time for the next polling question. So Courtney, you want to launch that one?
Perfect. To Darshan's point, we have the second poll open now. This one is pretty straightforward. How do you feel about using AI in procurement? This is another one that is just one response, so it shouldn't take too long. The first response is, it's great and helpful. I want to use it as much as possible. Second option is, it is helpful in certain cases. I use it with caution. Third option is, I haven't used it at all because I don't trust it yet. Last but not least, I don't see a use for AI in procurement. So once again, please get those responses in. We'll see how we're looking. Okay, perfect. Just leave the poll open for maybe another 10 to 15 seconds. Please get your final responses in. This is the last poll of today. So it's another 5 seconds. All right. I'll be closing the poll now. All right. The results should be here. B has the most options, just by 6%.
So this is an interesting stat. So we did similar surveys in the last 2 years with a lot of our clients, and it started with normal distribution. So if there are like 5 options, it was like a traditional normal distribution where people were in the middle. And what you'll see is most of the responses now are more on the left-hand side, where people see this as part of what they do, or they are testing it out and kind of fine-tuning that as part of the next phase, which is pretty interesting, and that's the maturity, and has been a pretty fast maturity within the last 18 months or so. So one of the things I want to kind of talk about is, when you think about AI or Gen AI, take a very system or a work design approach to it. So there's like a 4-pronged approach. One is, what is the work that you're trying to accomplish? Courtney, if you want to just wait for a second, just go back to, what is the work that you're trying to accomplish? What sort of jobs you're trying to deliver? What are the tasks involved in it? And what sort of skills do you need to actually do the work? And then how do you make it a human-centered AI, means human in loop, and then you have AI-enabled solutions associated with that? I think that's the way to kind of think about that. The next thing is, start with a few use cases, similar to what Dan mentioned. Like, start with the use cases that are critical for you, or you think you want to try it out. It could be contract intelligence, it could be AP invoice intelligence, category insights, or market intelligence integration and spend management. You can start with a handful of those. Don't boil the ocean with all the different use cases that you want to try it out. Start with a few where you can show the value, you can see the efficiency and effectiveness, and how the human-centered AI helps you in driving more value for the organization. And then the questions that you need to ask is, how do I take that systems approach to keep on trying out AI in my work in various tasks? How do I focus on reskilling my team so that the human in loop becomes reality for my organization? And what should be my short-term and long-term plan for human-centered AI? Now, when you think about these, what you realize is change management.
So I think what Darshan was trying to say there is change management is an extremely important piece of this entire aspect. So Dan, I know that you've taken a very interesting change management approach at Campbell's. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that from your perspective.
Absolutely. Thanks for jumping in there, Annie. Yeah, and when considering any implementation of new technology, our first priority is making sure that it's aligned with all of our cross-functional teams. And, obviously this is, paramount to our legal partners, our finance partners. Our finance is so closely tied to everything that we do on the procurement side. But another critical one is our IT partners, right? What capabilities do they actually have to support integrations like we have or that we're desired to do? Ensuring their involvement from the start, right, allows for, I wouldn't necessarily say 100% seamless integration. There's always hiccups, but certainly limiting any of the risks that come along with integrations, and ultimately allows for you to have a conversation around governance structure up front and that everybody aligns to from the beginning. The last thing that we want to have happen is that, we buy something that, not only procurement, but our stakeholders that we're supporting don't adopt. And then we get stuck with these workaround situations and efficiency goes out the window, which was the whole purpose of why we sourced that technology to begin with. So we take a cautious, incremental approach, one bite at a time, focusing on strong user adoption, right? Rolling out solutions gradually, enables us to manage more effectively, and then introducing multiple systems at once, right? This is not a boil the ocean type of endeavor to start. So, and lastly, with any type of change management, whether it's, digital transformation in procurement or anything else that you would be, implementing across a company, a department, a function, so forth and so on, getting that strong leadership and executive buy-in from the get-go is essential, right? And clearly communicating, the intent behind this, right? AI certainly comes with its own, benefits, but then you've got the doomsday people out there thinking about what does this actually mean? Being clear and transparent about the purpose and rationale on why you're approaching something to be more efficient, to drive greater insights, to be more predictive, and to reduce risks are all things that just need to be broadly communicated. And when they're communicated from the top down, it really helps support your change management process and ultimately approve, successful adoption, right? You want people to use the systems and tools that the company is investing in. So I don't know if we got Darshan back or if we're now with Annie. Darshan.
Okay.
As mentioned, he's in India and they've got some power issues. So Annie, I think it's on you.
Absolutely. So based on our experience with looking at different change management with multiple different clients that are going through a very similar transformational journey, what we're seeing is that the success of transformation has really been statistically better with organizations that take a similar approach, the incremental change management versus the full big bang approach. I know that at ProcureAbility, we're very intentional about change management with our clients. And we're strong believers in the rule of 37, where 1% sustained change every day can drive over 37% benefit versus a big bang approach, which may make the change not stick because of all the various components that may be playing a role in that entire process. So Courtney, I think we can flip on to the next slide here. So when we're thinking about the future of digital procurement, outside of some of the things that we talked about today, there are a few key things that you want to keep in mind. Some things that have come up recently are AI-powered procurement assistance, various ways to help us move forward in the procurement space and take some of the more manual tasks off people's plates. We've also seen an emergence of blockchains and smart contracting. Any way that we're able to automate any contracts or transactions overall has also been important. And then lastly, predictive analytics. When we're looking forward and forecasting any risks or cost that may be coming up, it's extremely important. I know right now, especially with all the tariffs upcoming and all the tariffs currently, predictive analytics is something that we're definitely looking into and relying more on as we are looking forward in this space. So looking at the future of digital procurement as a whole, it really is going to be shaped by some of the topics that we discussed today, which are empowering our procurement teams to really make more informed, data-driven decisions and to enhance that supply chain resilience. The goal with bringing in these tools is really to give our procurement teams more time to think strategically and the ability to kind of take that one step away from the more strategic work that they've been, or the more tactical work that they may be doing on a day-to-day basis. So Courtney here, I think we can flip to the next slide. Darshan, are you back on?
Yeah, I'm back on. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So my apologies. I think the network went out in between. So I think if you want to think about like all the conversations that we had and Dan's point of view around Campbell's transformation, I think 4 things that you can kind of take away from this webinar. First of all, digital transformation is here to stay. It's going to accelerate the efficiency for the procurement organization. AI, automation, analytics, that's going to drive procurement optimization. It's going to enable the cost saving. It's going to continue to drive value for the organization. When you think about the implementation, a phased approach, like an intentional phased approach, will minimize the disruption. It will drive right type of change. The incremental rollouts for the digital procurement technology will drive faster ROI for the organization. Stakeholder buy-in is very critical, whether it's your key stakeholders that you're working with or your executive team. They continue to work with you to drive that transformation. That's very critical. And then finally, AI and smart contracts is the future. The next era of procurement will be powered by AI-driven assistance. And Annie just talked about like blockchain, talked about the predictive analytics, and with all the fast change within the world, I think AI and smart contracts is definitely going to drive a significant value for the organization, and procurement will continue to gain seat at the table in how to drive the value for all types of organizations in the world. So that's what we had for today as a content, and I think the next section of this presentation is Q&A. So Elizabeth, over to you.
Great. Well, it's been a really informative conversation so far. So I want to thank Dan, Darshan, and Annie for stepping in so beautifully. We have some questions that have already been posed, but Courtney, if you can go to the next slide, we'll just make it official. We are in the Q&A section of our conversation. We do want to acknowledge that, as I said, there's already 2 questions. So I'm going to go ahead and address those. But if you have additional questions that you want to ask, please put them in the Q&A section and we will have Dan, Darshan, and Annie address them. But the first one that we have here, I think it's a more general question, but the question is, I feel like everything is IT now. Maybe many purchasing categories that before were well-defined have now a digitalization, possibility. AI involved, software to manage. How to organize within the procurement teams when divided by category commodities? Should everyone, for example, should everyone have basic IT training? Great question. Darshan, what's your thought on that?
I think that's a great question. The digitalization and the IT has been integrated part of all the categories. Like if you are organized by categories, and there is some portion of digitalization is always part of the category, whether it is professional services, whether it is like your traditional it used to be software and IT is like separated, and then you have professional services more on the labor-based categories. But all, like whether it is facilities, whether it is professional services, I think technology plays a very key role in how to think about the strategy for those categories. So I do agree that there is some level of minimum knowledge about technology that is necessary for all procurement professionals as they're thinking about their overall category strategies. And every organization and industry is a little bit different. So what sort of training or what sort of knowledge you should have as part of the industry might vary a little bit. But I do agree that I think there is a little bit more intersection of the technology and the IT portion of it, regardless of the category that you support. So Dan, I think your point of view would be very, very important here, just from a CPG standpoint. Like, how do you see this in your teams?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, you're spot on, right? And we're organized by category over here at Campbell's, and we've had to learn that to the person who posed this question that, you know, how do category managers, one, identify that there's IT or potentially even generative AI components within a contract or within an agreement.
Mm-hmm.
So what we've had to do is first learn how to, one, identify it, but then two, build a governance structure around it. So we have, I would say, arguably our biggest procurement team is our IT procurement team. And they are being fielded not just questions or requests about redlining or governance related structure, you know, is this Gen AI, is this a SaaS agreement, so forth and so on, for their own IT contracts, but for a lot of different things, right? Because everything in the logistics world is now going digital. Everything in the marketing world and data and all this stuff is borderline IT agreements already.
Right.
And even on the commodity side, right? There's IT components that 10 years ago didn't exist. So it's really just building a governance structure around how to deal with it, because it's not going to slow down. If anything, it will accelerate. So getting ahead of how do you educate your buyers on how to identify it and how to deal with it is important. So some type of base knowledge is important. And to the point that we made around how do you leverage technology to help educate and point it out is even better, right? Like you can leverage Gen AI to point out where Gen AI is being used. And so leverage technology to help you in that process as well.
Great answers. And you know, it makes a lot of sense, but both from both perspectives. This second question is a little different. This is talking about change and new technology adoption. The question is, obviously the best adoption is voluntary adoption from the users. However, this is not always the case, especially if operating in an MVP fashion. How has Campbell's been able to balance this, and what anecdotal percentages would you give to using the carrot versus the stick? So that's directed at you, Dan, but I'm sure, Harshan, you have a perspective as well, more overall. But Dan, what's your thought on that?
Yeah, I mean, that's tough, right? So in some of these instances, you're trying to implement something that you know, right, is going to have some level of resistance towards. It's a new process that, hey, we just learned how to do this, but now I'm asking you to do something completely different. That's really just bringing them along for the journey. And as I mentioned throughout our Campbell journey, user adoption is the North Star, right? We are not going to go down a road where we feel like the user adoption rate is going to be a victim or potentially, you know, be the reason or rationale why something isn't successful. So we do a ton of piloting, right? So we do a ton of trial and error, get people to not just demo, right? Because a lot of suppliers want to come in and do demo, and that's an ideal state, ideal environment, right? That doesn't work, right? We need time to sit with the tool. We need the end users that will be ultimately using the tool to be the one that comes back to a steering committee that says, yes, this is something that we can get behind. Yes, the efficiency that was promised in the demo we did a couple of weeks ago is real, right? And we can get behind it. So the more you can get suppliers to offer piloting, and they are likely all to offer it, I'd go down that route and really get, your buyers like hands touching keyboards, using the tool for as long as you can before you go ahead and take the leap and jump to purchase something.
Right. And Darshan, obviously in your career, you've seen a lot of technology implementation and successful user adoption. Anything to add to what Dan just said?
Yeah, I think it depends on the type of technology usage that you're trying to drive. If it is more of a compliance type of thing, I think there is some merit in driving tops down or traditional stick approach where you are driving compliance and it's going to come in as part of the overall rollout. But if I think about like there was a question around percentage, and if I look at multiple industries, that range is most probably 70 to 80% is more of that organic adoption, and 20 to 30% is most probably a little bit of that tops down forced adoption that is because you're trying to drive something that is very important for the organization. But that percentage is most probably 20 to 30%, 70 to 80% is more around that organic user adoption.
Great, thank you. We have a few more questions here. One just came in and I think is really interesting, and I'd love, again, pose it to both of you, but maybe start with you, Dan. Question is, have you or will you change any job requirements from a skill set perspective when recruiting the next generation of procurement talent? And I think the underlying statement here is, based on what you're seeing technology solutions are coming into play and how that's impacting the workloads.
Yeah, great question, right? And it's certainly a part of, all hiring managers, thoughts as they're bringing in somebody to interview for a role is, have the job requirements or expectations of the role changed as the environment is changing? And the short answer is yes, but I think it's gradual, right? This isn't something that we're changing overnight. But what I can say is that as a procurement organization, we are creating roles that are specifically tied to this and tied to predictive data analytics, tied to the deployment of continuous improvement, which a lot of our continuous improvement initiatives are associated with digital transformation. So I would say that yes, in part, right? In some cases, we need to buy a buyer to be knowledgeable on the function or subject of what they are actually procuring. Having some additional technical know-how is important, but how we're approaching it is the investment in people on the team who are designated to support initiatives like this.
Right. And Darshan, any other perspective, again, because you are, you look at a lot of different companies, a lot of different industries. Are you seeing any changes to job requirements or job descriptions or even required skills?
Yeah. I think if I want to kind of think about the key skills that are, as we talked about, like human-centered AI in procurement, right? As it shapes up further and where we are becoming like more of an augmented intelligence with AI, the talent and people with critical thinking are going to be essential as you are building that HCI-enabled organization. The second key skill that is going to be important is individuals who are comfortable with change, considering the change is going to be very rapid, and that's always going to be part of your overall integrated operating model. And then finally, like the strategic relationship mindset is going to be very important because there is always going to be something intangible that can't be automated. That's going to be more human. And so having that strategic relationship mindset is also going to be very key for future talent pool. So I think those would be kind of the key skills that are going to be very important for talent, and especially like a lot more important than what it used to be.
Right. Thank you. We have a question that came in that's really specific for you, Dan. It says, can you give any additional insights into the investment in tools? It says a range is fine, dollar range, not expecting any commercial sensitivities to be shared. And if you can also, any ROI from those investments, and do you have a centralized or decentralized procurement function, and how large is your team? So I think this question is trying to understand maybe the profile of your team when you set about to go through this adoption with ProcureAbility.
Yeah. Some of those questions I can answer in very vague terms, but yeah, I would say these tools aren't necessarily cheap, but they're not extraordinarily expensive either. We go about each of them, as I said, niche solution after niche solution, and everyone has their own return on investment case. But to put it in the perspective, I have a team of 21 procurement professionals. I also leverage ProcureAbility as well with an additional 7. But our broader procurement organization, that's just isolated to indirect, is around 90 people strong. And that's across, call it a little over $6.5 billion of spend under management.
Great, thank you.
And we are centralized. We are centralized. We sit in the center. We report up through supply chain. We support all components and functions of the company. Comes through procurement.
Great, thank you. Another question we have is, this one starts, contracts are one part of IT. What about investigating how much technology is actually being used and looking at different emerging vendors that perhaps consolidate functions or cover capabilities that would make legacy tech redundant? And by the way, I'm just making a side note here. This is a theme that I've heard from a couple different clients now. Can they use new technology to perhaps move away from some of the more legacy systems, the end-to-end systems, or because you just mentioned, Dan, focusing on those niche or the gaps types of solution providers. Any thoughts on that from either Darshan or Dan?
Darshan, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, I can start with this one. Absolutely. I think this is one of those areas which is definitely we're seeing a big traction in, where you used to have traditional SaaS platforms, which used to be multi-million-dollar deployments, and then it was hard to kind of integrate into, and then having the data cleansing issues, and everything was still part of the overall deployment. And then what organizations are realizing is those are too heavy and not as nimble as they would like it to be. So there are quite a few emerging technologies, especially with the Gen AI emergence. Organizations are coming up with platforms that would consolidate some of these legacy platforms into simple to use technologies. Do you really need a Rolls-Royce, or can you get away with a Camry to be able to do what you need to do and don't have to spend millions of dollars to actually do the work, right, from a technology standpoint? And I think a lot of organizations are coming to that conclusion. With ProcureAbility, actually, if you think about it, Jabil just announced a joint venture with a Gen AI company, Seifert, called ID number 8. The whole focus is around that, is looking at all the use cases and building a very quick deploy Gen AI solutions to solve these unique use cases that were traditionally done by large-scale legacy platforms, and being able to deploy it quickly in a matter of weeks. And that will continue. That the industry is going towards that, and then you're going to see a lot more adoption and traction over there. Dan, any other point of view on that?
No, honestly, you answered it pretty well, right? We are aligned to that message. So we're starting to see it firsthand that some of these smaller niche companies can, collectively, and I see another question kind of coming in around this, collectively consume what was previously done by larger, all-inclusive providers. Absolutely.
And given that, Dan, why don't we address that question next? Let me read it. It says, Campbell's appears to be an early adopter of AI and tools derived from it. Given that you're adopting multiple niche solutions rather than an all-in-one, how are you approaching / planning for the rapid advancement of these technologies?
Yeah, it's something that, as I mentioned in the beginning, right, we have to make sure that as we're approaching this, we're doing it cross-functionally with our IT partners. There isn't a single thing that we implement or do that's without their participation. So the last thing that you want is a ton of different systems that don't talk or connect to each other at the end of the day. So everything that we're doing is, making sure that it's connecting to either our data lake or some other central repository of data, so that we don't fall victim to a situation where we have all these things and none of it talks to one another. So everything goes through a governance review board before it's passed off and blessed on.
Right.
I have a comment to make around this is, I think the technologies are going to mature. One of the areas that there is worth investing enough time on is common data models. So when you're choosing multiple platforms, having a common data model that you can continue to leverage, and I've talked about data lake, spending enough time to make sure that you get that right, so that even if the technologies mature at a very rapid pace, your data sanity stays consistent. And I think that's where the biggest challenge generally comes in as these technologies mature. So making sure that having that common data models and spending time in getting that right would be critical.
Right. Thank you. We only have a couple more minutes and we still have two questions in the queue. If I can just ask you to, at least let's look at the first one. What can you say about security risks with the increasing usage of Gen AI? And I have a feeling this will be a long answer, but I think that your input or your insights on this will be really helpful.
Yeah, it's, naturally with anything IT related, right, it's going to go through a vendor IT risk assessment. That's something that's pretty staple. And if there's any PII, it's going to go through a PIRA, right? What we've had to do at Campbell's is with generative AI, if there's anything that's generative AI and any supply-based agreement, it not only goes through a VERA, but it's going to also go through a Gen AI governance review board that's led by IT and our IT security team. So we had to stand that up, and that's across any category. That could be a marketing contract, it could be a data insights contract, it could be anything where Gen AI, it's going to a review board and they're going to make sure that it passes whatever our IT security provisions require. So we had to set that up within our IT group.
And that's been, it sounds like that's a little bit of a theme of how Campbell's has approached this. You've led this through, is the idea that you have some governance and framework structures to assure sort of a consistency. Sounds like, especially when you don't maybe know what's coming down the path, but if you have that structure in place, it allows you to address each potential new solution in the same way, covering the same areas. So that's very helpful. The final question we have is, I'm curious about the contract / redline / niche AI tool that you chose, Dan, and why and how did you get legal to agree to it, allow it, agree to use it, and any rules that you put around it? So
yeah,
question.
I probably not appropriate me to disclose the supplier, but if I'd be happy to connect with somebody else line if that's the case. But certainly that was a lengthy conversation, right? That was a lengthy conversation between how it's going to be used, the trustworthiness of the tool, what it really means for efficiency. Certainly Gen AI and the technology space has it out for several industries, the legal space being one near the top of the list. So their reluctance to adopt a tool like this certainly came through, but with with the demos, again, with the demos and piloting of the tool to demonstrate with them, here, use it for a couple of weeks, they started to see the value.
Gotcha. Well, thank you so much, Dan, Darshan, and Annie. This has been a really enlightening conversation, and I want to thank everyone for joining. And please do take the survey that you're going to get from Courtney now. It will help us to understand what you found of value, and also will ensure those of you who need continuing education credit can get that. Thank you.
Have a great rest of your day, everybody. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.